So just so you know, you're in the right. Oh, so you're in the right session. This is building future regional markets through collaboration. As I mentioned, my name is Marissa Segundo. I am the Strategic Communications Waste Lead with HDR. And a couple of session logistics. We're going to ask you to use, well, you'll all be muted, but if for some reason you come unmuted, go ahead and mute yourself again so we can keep all the questions in the chat area. But we do want this to be interactive. So please feel free and chat questions at panelists at any time. Sharing them with the group if you can. And then we will also have the opportunity to participate in live polling. And so if you want to go ahead and just open up another tab in your internet browser and just keep that open. And this is the website that you'll go to. It's pollev.com/HDR waste 404. And I'll also put that in the chat in just a moment. So we've got that. Actually, I'll grab it and put it in the chat right now. Let me put it in the chat. Here we go. All right, well, it's not pasting, but there we go. It's in your chat. And we want to have that ready because we're going to start things off with a poll before I introduce this fantastic group of expert panelists that will be here with us today for the next 55 minutes. I want to let everyone know that the slides will, and likely a recording will be available after the event. So keep in touch with NRC to make sure that you have all that information. So hopefully you already have gone through that. Look at you all. So using just one word, this is a word cloud. So as a word is popular, it will get bigger. And you guys have probably seen these in our wonderful Zoom generation over the past 2.5 years. So use one word to describe what you think is working well with recycling. We're also looking at a world that 2 years ago looked a little bit different. So we're seeing awareness and policy, and awareness is getting bigger. Aluminum, paper, we're seeing some commodity-based answers there. Regulation, awareness is getting bigger. I'm excited for our panelists to dig into that a little bit. Local markets, awareness is still growing. A desire, I like that. Local markets again, all right. So, wow, awareness is winning. Not that it's a competition. I see data in there, organics. Now I'm going to switch my slide. You guys should be able to still comment on this so we can see if our cloud gets bigger because you're on the web. So awareness is still getting bigger and so is desire. So also excited to see composting and organics in there as well as behavior change. So without further ado, I want to talk a little bit about why we're here, why NRC is involved in this. And NRC has been championing, I can't say that word, you know what I'm saying. So recycling markets and awareness and these regional regional events that we did before the pandemic. And I had the honor of helping them, as well as all these awesome organizations and nonprofit organizations, SROs, and other organizations to make this possible. It was 2018 through 2020. I'm going to go forward for a moment, just so you can see a little bit of the map of how this works. We're all over the country because we wanted to understand that things look different in your recycling markets depending on where you're at and depending on what your markets look like. So from that, we had the ability to work with a lot of different individuals and organizations to really get insight and think strategically about how to build new markets and really create an attractive landscape in your region in order to build markets and understand data and understand who else should be at the table and why are we doing this and how can we do this better. So these are some of the takeaways that we got from those. This was 2018 through 2020. After 2020, we shift to more of a virtual concept. So you'll see some insights from that as well. We had expert panels, presentations, and a lot of interaction and strategic stakeholder engagement through those. So this was kind of an initial step that led to a lot of the insights that we, even that we saw in that first word cloud. So this is a word cloud actually right when the pandemic was starting. You're seeing some of these similar themes as far as what the concerns are. Markets were a big concern, contamination. You're also seeing some commodity-based feedback in there as well. Funding was what people pointed out was the greatest need. And we're in this really awesome time, well, in my opinion, an awesome time for recycling. As someone who's been in recycling and sustainability for the past 15 years, it, with the EPA, the National Recycling Strategy, this is laying the groundwork, and a lot of what we're going to hear from our panelists today of what's happening on a national level, a state level, and a multi-state level. It's an exciting time to be in recycling. So a little bit of the outcomes we got from these in-person and virtual markets development workshop, we're encouraging regional planning and looking at a diverse stakeholder, getting economic developments and policymakers, chambers of commerce. We always tend to talk to the same people. So how can we expand and grow that? How do we look at quality versus quantity and kind of attack some of those contamination issues, as well as growing domestic markets? So that's kind of lays the groundwork for why we're here today and our fantastic speakers. I'm going to toss it to Marianne Romolador. She's the Assistant Director at the Northeast Recycling Council, known to all of us as NERC, and they are doing great things. So I'll pass the mic over to you.
Thanks, Marissa, and thank you to NRC for your invite to have me here. The NERC is a nonprofit organization that works with the 11 Northeast states on sustainable materials management issues. We have board of directors who are representatives of the environmental agencies of the states. And we also have the private sector who are our advisory members, and they include businesses, municipalities, trade associations, nonprofits, consultants, and individuals. Next slide, please. We were developed in 1987 as a special project of the Council of State Governments, specifically to help states with recycling market development issues. So whilst during that time, states were very focused on working on municipal recycling programs, NERC took a focus on business development at that time and working with larger entities. And some of the, on the screen now are some of the projects that we undertook, but I will also highlight them. We worked with the U.S. Postal Service to help them divert a lot of the undeliverable bulk business mail to recycling. Previous to that, it had all been going into the garbage, and they just needed our help to figure out the recycling system internally to make it to make those materials diverted to recycling. We also worked with the Newspaper Publishers Association for the Northeast and helped them, at least the newspaper publishers for the Northeast, to come to a voluntary agreement to use a certain percentage of recycled content in all of the newspapers published for the Northeast. On the other side of work with businesses, we helped recycling entrepreneurs to be able to find the financing that they were seeking. And we did this in different ways. We helped the financiers better understand what recycling was all about. At that time, financiers were saying to us, is recycling even a viable industry sector? And And we know there's lots of industry sectors within recycling. How does it work? It's cyclical, markets go up and down. Would we ever make money on these industries? So we developed the country's first recycling economic information study, and that was specific to the Northeast because we wanted data that quantified the recycling industry for the financing industry sector. That was the initial impetus for that study. We also held seminars and workshops for economic developers and financiers, where we could talk to them one-on-one and have them ask questions to raise their awareness and understanding about the industry. We also held investment forums where recycling entrepreneurs, these were primarily startup companies, would make their pitch in front of a financier or investor audience. And we know that 33% of the businesses who presented were able to find financing at those events. Now, all of these efforts were funded in large part by EPA's Jobs Through Recycling Fund. And as we all know, that's no longer available. So we jettison forward to what NERC does now and how we approach our work with recycling market development and working as a regional organization. One of the things we do annually is a survey both of our board members as well as our advisory members to get a good idea as what they see the priorities for NERC that would benefit them. So these three topics were what came out of the 2022 priorities. And we use that information both in possibly working on projects related to those subjects, as well as what we might present during our conferences that we hold or in webinars. Next slide. The other way NERC has really become very strong is through our committees. They're made up of both the board of directors and advisory members. So we continue to allow for both government and industry to work together to collaborate on developing projects, on implementing projects, on having discussions that will help us all be able to work together more effectively. And the four committees listed here are those that NERC staffs directly. We are also, you see under the Markets Committee, we are working with NUMOA, which is the Northeast Waste Management Officials Association. The easiest way to describe them is that they too are working on sustainable materials management, but their board of directors are the bosses of our board of directors. So they're the decision makers in the states, where our board of directors may be regulators, but they're also the management team that oversees the implementation of the recycling programs, and sometimes the economic development programs as well. So we partner with NUMOA on a total of 11 committees. This way, and that's been a great experience because we've been able to learn from their perspective and to also share our point of view, which is informed by both the industry and government at a different level, to their board of directors. And out of that, we have one of the most recent projects that was completed was we developed plastics model legislation with NUMOA. We also this past year developed model legislation for minimum minimum content of post-consumer glass in glass containers as well as fiberglass. And that was something that we undertook as a process that included both industry and government. Because again, we feel that both sides and these two sides are best when they work together rather than in a vacuum. Next slide. So before I end, I just wanted to say that the committee work and the annual surveys, they help us to develop the agendas that we offer, both in our conferences, in our webinars, so that we can share that information more largely, both within our region and nationally. And that's it for me.
Great. Great, Marianne. Thank you so much. I'm as our next presenter is queuing up. That was great information, and we will have a we're hoping to have time at the end where we can ask all of the presenters, and you all can ask your question as well. So Marianne brought a bunch of interesting points about what they're doing in the Northeast to boost recycling markets. So unlike the word cloud we saw before, this one you can actually put a sentence in. So if you want to, I don't really want you to write like War and Peace, but if you if you want to put just a sentence or two about what you think would best boost recycling markets, I'm going to leave the poll up, and it should be active, and then I will actually shift to our next presenter, and then we can come back to you should be able to see this online. So I'm going to shift so we can introduce our next presenter, who is Matt Flechter, who is the Recycling Market Development Specialist for the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, or also known as EGLE. Take it away, Matt. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Oh, somebody muted me. I'm sorry. Hello, everybody. Thank you. Let's see. Are we unmuted now? Can I get a?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Awesome. Thanks, Marissa. I'm really glad to be here today. And what we're going to do is I'll walk you through a little bit of my answer to that question, what I think needs to be done to boost markets, and tell you what Michigan is up to. And then we're going to have a conversation afterwards. So we'll have some questions and answers. But really what I want to talk to you today about is how we've listened to the value chain and our journey toward a circular economy. So I'm Matt Flechter. I'm Recycling Market Development Specialist for the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. And I would say, I don't know if I've got bags under my eyes or not, but I feel like I do, because I can go to the next slide. Thanks, Marissa. Because we had a pretty exciting night here in Michigan that, if you haven't heard, we just turned, for the first time in 40 years, we've got the same party running the governor's seat as well as the House and Senate. So I woke up this morning with this newfound energy. My brain is storming with all kinds of ideas to work with our partners across the country and take what we heard through the recycling market development forums and put it into action, potentially in some policy. But next slide, please. Through those forums that we did, that Marissa talked about, we did forums around the state specifically to listen to what the value chain was saying needs to happen. And some of the things that we heard were, we need more access to recycling opportunities, and we need to invest in that access. And so what we did is we worked with the legislature to get funding, to make funding available up to $15 million a year for Michigan businesses and communities to grow recycling infrastructure and develop markets. Some of the stuff that we do in Michigan really is, we take a systems approach. So yes, my title is Recycling Market Development Specialist, but I think about the entire system, the policy, the funding, the infrastructure, the education that's needed. And so just giving money to give for market development grants for end use of materials is not going to get us to our goals of 45% recycling and a strong circular economy. But this is one thing that we heard we needed to do, and we did. Next slide, please. So we also heard that quality was key. I liked Marissa's slide where it said, I think contamination was the word, and it was really big. That was a big deal for the past 5 years at least. So we heard that in our market development forums that we had around the state. And so we turned that into action by creating a quality improvement grant and partnership with the Recycling Partnership to help communities identify how they can, what are their major contaminants, and how can they address those through education. You flip the lid, you do sorts, and you do cart tagging. So we've done that type of work. We've grown that, and we've also expanded that into drop-off quality improvement. And I saw Ashley, you're on. There you go. Thanks for letting us use your picture there. Next slide. We also heard that people need to know how, why, and where to recycle it, and why recycling correctly is important. So we created the Know It Before You Throw It campaign, education campaign where we worked with legislators and local decision makers, get them up behind the podium to have them tell their local stories about their recycling program. So that's one thing that happens with it. And it also helps to tell the story in the press and get stories out there related to how, why, and where to recycle. We know that having the public know why that's important actually leads to growing markets, because and the next slide, please. Because the work that we do, having local officials know how they can grow their local circular economies is really important. So they need to hear why it's important, and then they need to know what to do. So we worked with EPA and the Michigan Recycling Coalition to develop a recycling curriculum and also support the Make the Case for Recycling work. And next slide, please. We also heard climate equity and jobs, really important. So again, telling those local stories about how recycling makes a positive impact on the climate, on jobs, on equitable jobs has been really important as well. It's what we've been doing in Michigan. Next slide, please. We heard the data was really important. Looking at those gaps, we do an annual gap analysis through next cycle, identifying where those gaps are and what we can do to fill them. And then next slide, please. And as I just mentioned, next cycle, what we heard at the market development forums was partnerships and innovation is key. So having strong partnerships and incubating and accelerating businesses at the local level with their innovative ideas to use material, to collect material, to move it into market was key as well. And we'll talk more about what next cycle, what we're doing through next cycle, and then how you can connect in with that as well. But we're really proud of the work that we're doing, and we look forward to the rest of the conversation. Thanks, Marissa.
Thanks so much, Matt. Well, we're going back to the poll. All right, pull up that extra slide, and this one's an easy. It's a multiple choice. You don't have to come up with any type of flowery words or anything. So would regional recycling market development workshops, the ones that you heard Matt talk about that they did statewide, or the ones that NERC was doing in the 90s to help boost markets, would that be beneficial to you? And, this is also something you can think about. Are you working regionally? Are you just kind of in your little siloed area? And so maybe it doesn't seem like a possibility now if you're not currently doing it, but would you, if you had a wish list, just like Matt had several years ago when he was imagining what Michigan recycling looks like now, if you dream it, it can happen. I'm seeing a lot of people on the highly agree or somewhat agree, and no one highly disagrees. So that will stay up, and I promise by the end we'll go back to that qualitative questions. So without further ado, I want to introduce our next and final panelist for today. This is Amy Roth. She's the Resource Director of the Association of Oregon Recyclers. Amy, are you able to unmute?
There we go. Hello,
All
everyone.
right.
Thank you. So I'm going to sort of give a really quick highlight of how Oregon has gotten to where we.
Oh, I think we lost you for a second there, Amy.
I keep unmuting, but it keeps muting me back. I'm not sure what's going on. If you could jump to the next slide. I want to give a really quick history of how Oregon has gotten to where we are for what we think is the best tool for developing recycling markets. As you know, Oregon is one of 4 states that has recently adopted a system of EPR as we look to revamp our recycling system. And so this did not happen overnight by any stretch. Our market development, you could say, started back in 1972 with the development of our implementation of the nation's first bottle bill. Over the years, as you can see there, our bottle bill has expanded to add more materials, to increase the redemption rate. And Oregon is known to have one of the most successful redemption programs in the country. We are currently sitting at 80.6% redemption rates as of 2021, which is about mid-year through the pandemic. And we did recently just have that expanded in our 22 legislative session to include wine and cans. One of the things that's really notable about the bottle bill and how that helped spur market development was that in 2012, as a response to the 2007 legislation that brought about water bottles being added to the system in 2009, is that suddenly our waste stream has this huge influx of PET into the system. And so ORPET was developed. ORPET was developed between OBRC, which is the Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative, and Merlin Plastics and Denton Plastics to develop a really large, one-of-a-kind, sort of state-of-the-art PET recycling center here in Oregon that processes all of our bottleable materials. We also process all of our glass materials here in the state as well. So that's sort of our first gambit into recycling market development. Moving into the 80s, we saw our 1983 the Recycling Opportunity Act. And then in 1991, further expanding upon that was the Oregon Recycling Act. That really started focusing on the purchasing power of state agencies, having mandates to purchase, to buy recycled and recyclable materials to help further spur that market development. So next slide. As we got into the 2000s, sort of the framework of how we thought about recycling and recycling markets across the country started to sort of change. In 2001, we had a shift into the 2001 Recycling Act, which established new statewide and waste shed recovery goals, which by 2009, we weren't meeting those. But we did start to have a shift in our focus overall, looking at further upstream for waste prevention, thinking about waste more strategically and looking at life cycle assessments, noting the impact of materials on climate, and really embracing that change in our industry from thinking about discards into sustainable materials management. That ultimately led Oregon to develop the 2050 vision and framework for action, which was adopted and put into action in 2012. So this was a really lengthy process as well that sort of envisioned, what do we want Oregon to look like by 2050? And so we see here that we wanted producers to make a product sustainably, that every option that available to consumers is a sustainable option. People live well, consume sustainably, and the materials have the most useful life possible before and after discard. So this sounds all really great. And then we had a series of unfortunate events, which we all know about. If you can go to the next slide, I'm not even sure I need to mention it. We had the 2013 Green Fence, 2017, the National Sword, 2018 Blue Sky, and this dramatically impacted Oregon's markets. Being on the West Coast, the majority of our materials, because of cheap shipping options and high demand from Chinese markets, our materials were all going overseas. Suddenly, we did not have options for our materials to go anywhere. So we were in a bit of a markets crisis, and I apologize, my slide here notes April 8, 2018, but it was actually in January of 2018 that we worked with the NRC to host the first recycling markets development workshop here in Portland. And we were really looking to identify long-term solutions toward developing quality domestic markets and how to stabilize our recycling infrastructure. Our materials, our MRFs and our processors and everyone really kind of took the approach somewhat that Matt was looking at there in Michigan of we need to be focusing on re-educating the public. We had a huge contamination issue. There was no way we were going to meet the Blue Sky initiatives of 0.5% contamination. Our materials were regularly sitting between about 8 and 14%, I believe, contamination. And so without really getting down into having the public understand that wishful recycling of just because you think it should be recyclable, that it shouldn't go into the bin. Also identifying that there's a lot of confusion on recycling around the chasing arrows and that we need to see some truth in labeling happening. So by May of 2018, our Department of Environmental Quality formed the Recycling Steering Committee, which I sat on representing the Association of Oregon Recyclers. The committee was a group of about 16, 17 regional partners, processors, basically everyone involved in the value chain of recycling, sat down to develop a plan of how to modernize Oregon's recycling system so that our markets were stronger and they were more resilient to market changes. Ultimately, we reached consensus by September of 2020 and legislation was put forth. And that is how we got to, next slide, the passage of the Plastic Pollution and Recycling Modernization Act, which we refer to in a shortened manner of the RMA, the Recycling Modernization Act, which is going to build upon the local community programs, leveraging the resources of producers to create this innovative system that works for everyone. These are the key benefits here. The law went into effect in 2022. DEQ and stakeholder groups have been working tirelessly behind the scenes, putting together the Truth in Labeling Task Force, among a whole host of other things. I really encourage you to visit the DEQ website for more information. I can drop that link into the chat here so you can get some more information. But ultimately, where we landed was that having a well-designed and strong system of EPR, where producers have some skin in the game, is ultimately what is going to lead us to strong recycling markets here in Oregon, regionally, and potentially nationally as well. And we'll open it up, it sounds like, to discussion from the group.
Sorry, I was trying to mute myself. So yes, I am actually going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. We will wrap it up with another poll because we got to have the polls. But give an opportunity for you to see the faces of this amazing panel and take any questions that you have. As moderator's privilege, I'm going to go ahead and throw out the first one. So we've talked a lot about how, we kind of worked our way across the country as far as different ways that you all and your organizations have approached market developments. And I'll go down the line, starting quickly with Marianne, about where would you suggest if an organization, or maybe it's a municipality, maybe it's a private sector participant, wants to, where would they start in their market development journey?
Yeah, I think that's not an easy question, because depending on where they're at, what they're being faced with could be completely different about availability to, if it's businesses, their availability to materials or not. So I would say, though, that I always encourage people, the first question I ask of calls of people who call me is, who have you talked to already? Have you spoken to the state environmental agency? If there is a state recycling organization, have you reached out to them as well? And to encourage that person to network as much as possible. I also, depending on the timing of the call, I also encourage people to attend our conferences, because they're assured that they will be in a room with representatives at least of the 11 Northeast states and people from all over the country, which is a great place for them to network and to ask questions and just to get hooked into what's going on.
And that was a little bit of a trick question, Marianne, and you answered it very well.
I got that.
Especially you are on the call are the one who represents the most states, whereas Matt and Amy, represent two large states with a lot of different interstate benefits and barriers. I mean, Matt's state it's like two states, right? Because you have an Upper Peninsula, Lower Peninsula. You've got topographical challenges in Oregon as well. So what I heard Marianne say is that it's local, it's making sure you have the right people at the table at the beginning. And we heard from Matt. I'm going to throw it over to you real quick. How do you feel like some of that initial research that Michigan did with those interstate market development workshops, how do you think that really informed where you're at today?
Yeah, the data was key in being able to tell the complete story, and being able to use the data to talk to local officials and decision makers about what they can do to grow markets. So to answer your question a little bit more broadly is thinking about infrastructure, data, policy, funding, and education in the context of market development is really, really important for us all to do, because one thing that I think some people think about with market development is they're thinking about making sure at the end it turns into a new product, but you can't do that without the system. So the data that Marissa is talking about, being able to tell that localized story is really cool. We did a market development forum a couple months ago now, in the upper part of Michigan. And we had in-use markets, the people that need the material, the plastic, the paper, talking to local officials saying the biggest problem with our markets right now is that we're not getting enough off the curb and into our products that you're making with jobs right in your backyard. And to watch these local officials, their heads just like, what? I thought recycling was broken. No, we use data to show this is where it's going. We know how it flows. And this is what you can specifically do to capture more of that material. I mean, it changes everything when you can get the data in front of somebody and have a conversation about what those local jobs really mean for a community.
Definitely. Amy, you talked a little bit about what your situation was after, as Matt alluded to, recycling was broken. Do you think that recycling, because of the steps that AOR and others have taken in the face of that situation, is better off, or do you feel like it has further to go? I know that's a little bit of a loaded question, but
not really. I mean, we had known for a while that education is sort of key. We saw a lot of contamination issues, and that was always one of the things we were hearing from, the haulers and our processors. And, for a long time, China was okay with quite literally taking our crap. It didn't matter. They had the capacity to take it, and they would. And they finally told the world, we're not going to do that anymore. And so it really empowered our haulers and our MRFs and our system to kind of push back onto the consumers, to really educate them, that saying, you're not doing the system any favor by putting something that you want to be recyclable into the bin when it's not. You're actually ruining all of those other things that are. It gave the consumers some pause to think about what they were buying, if they really wanted things to be recyclable, to be in their bin, and sort of recognize how much garbage they're actually creating. But then that also pushed forward of, well, it looks like it's recyclable. It says it's recyclable. We have a huge problem of this truth in labeling. We saw California pass it. Oregon has the measure of recommendations that have been made as well for truth in labeling to identify what is and isn't recyclable. People have become accustomed to equating those resin identification codes, known as the chasing arrows, as equating to recyclability. And that's not actually true. And it's not true across the board. And so recognizing with local markets of what is and isn't recyclable is going to vary across the regions where markets are. That's one of the things that with the Recycling Modernization Act that we are doing here, is to have a statewide acceptability list, so that if you work in one city and you live in another, all of the same materials are going to be collected throughout the state, and not maybe here, not over there, but really helping to bolster those markets to get that supply, as Matt identified, that they want. And so that's sort of the next step for us, is to make sure that what's in the bin is what is wanted and has a viable end market, so it will be reused into new products.
Excellent, excellent. Because we know the quality, we saw it before the pandemic. We hear it all the time as someone who's been in recycling education for almost 2 decades. It is important, but to me, it's always a yes and. To Matt's point, you need the data. To Marianne's point, you need the right people at the table. So it's multiple aspects, but it's also, education needs to be part of that. And speaking of which, I know there's a rigorous chatting going on in our chat feed. So I encourage people to look at that. And if you have something coming up, if you are interested in a market development workshop in your area, if you already have one going out, there's 74 people on this call that would love to hear about it and be part of it. I mean, this is not something that we can do alone. And it is all aspects working together, public sector, private sector, P3s, like everybody working together to make this happen. So I'm seeing, and I'm just reading it as it's popping in. It says, this isn't a fair question. Oh wait, that was above there. The first among equal. Oh, okay. So there's a good chat going on in there, but we do encourage, if you have questions directly for the presenters, to put them in the chat. I'm just looking as far as local jobs. Does anybody want to comment on because I know that's a big aspect that as far as recycling creating local jobs, and that I don't know if we're looking at that as far as that being a talking point benefit, or how that impact is, or if any of our panelists want to comment on that.
I would like to comment. One of the things that I've seen over the years is the involvement of economic developers in recycling market development programs has waned, and it really, because of that inconsistency, I think there's always a need to reach out to the economic developers in the state and to really encourage the state recycling offices to do the same, and to keep them in the loop, and for us not to assume that they are there when we need them, but to, to be more proactive, to make sure that they're involved, because it's imperative when you have a company who is considering leaving one of your states, and its impact on recycling markets is so great that it drops one of a material type out of the running in your region, like what happened in the Northeast with glass. It has huge impact, and we're struggling to fill the gap that a lack of an end market for glass has left us with. So, it's almost like the afterthought now. Where is the economic development going on, And I don't know if it was actively pursuing the company that left, but we need to be sure that on our end, we continue to reach out to the economic developers.
Yeah, let me add to that, Marissa, because
I'm going to toss it right over to you.
I kind of feel like Michigan is in some ways, following in your footsteps, a little bit new kid on the block, but we want to do things a little bit differently than in the past. So thinking about what those stories that the economic development agencies are trying to tell, and then providing them tools and resources to get there through recycling, through circular economy, is really the direction that shifted over the past couple of years in Michigan, where I realized after 15 or so years of banging my head on like trying to get economic development, the agencies and local folks to pay attention to something that we care about. If you're on this call, you care about it. So you want those local economic development agency, but how do you do that? You don't just say you should be there. Why aren't you here? we have to find the way to meet their needs
Mhm.
so that they want to be involved in circular economy activities. And so that's one of the things that we did with Next Cycle. So Next Cycle, really, we brought them in, brought the Economic Development Agency, either state or local, to be part of that solution so that we were meeting their needs. They kind of came in and like, what is this recycling thing? I thought it was something else, but having them actually create and be part of it, I've seen a completely different approach being taken now, because now they're starting to hear from those businesses, because they're out there talking about, okay, we're doing this other thing, this Next Cycle thing, it's circular economy stuff. And then all of a sudden the narrative is changed where they're getting that positive feedback because they were involved. So my point with this is, don't just say they should be there, give them a specific action that they can take. And that could be getting on an advisory group or asking them to come to speak at your conference specifically, getting the directors of those economic agencies to say to their staff, what are we doing on circular economy? That's your goal. So that's, and I would say that Next Cycle is the way that is the platform that we've done it in Michigan.
And that's a really good point. And the Next Cycle website is also in the chat. I want to toss it to Amy to talk a little bit about, Oregon has this policy. They spent the past two and a half years developing this policy. Do you have a sense how, this was one of the items that came in the chat, how policy, well, I guess it's a two-part question. One in the chat was like, is there, I don't want to say silver bullet, but a silver bullet policy that Oregon has found, or even that has looked to in different places, that could help to spur or encourage market development in their state or region?
So, Oregon's recycling history, and that's sort of why I wanted to show that to begin with, has sort of always been very policy driven. Our markets have been driven by state policy. One of the things that came out of that 1991 legislation was the Oregon Recycling Markets Development Corporation. And they were funded through legislature for about $50,000 and were charged with helping to spur market development throughout the state. And what came out of that 1991 policy was largely the system that we have had today. And ORMDC came under the purview of the Association of Oregon Recyclers. And we had some market downturns previously and realized that even trying to bring in Business Oregon, which was our economic state agency at the time, I think they have a new name now, pardon me for not knowing off the top of my head. It's hard to affect policy, it's hard to affect markets without having some policies really to kind of drive it. I mean, I would say that, we can look to a lot of corporations who've made voluntary pledges for years and years and years and continue to miss those marks. What we have seen, and I think which is why we here in Oregon are relying on moving forward of a system of EPR, is that policy has helped drive the market development. It will help drive the clean materials that we want to see. And if, manufacturers want to put in crap into the system, well, they're going to pay to put that crap into the system. They're going to pay for it. And so that's unfortunately hitting those producers in the pockets, I think has sort of been a tool. I don't want to say it's a carrot, but I think it ultimately helps incentivize them to bring in cleaner materials, to bring in things that actually are wanted and not just putting everything out that looks amazing on the shelf. And I think that's sort of the challenge that we have, is that we as people we're lured by, all the new and the fancy and what looks great, and the marketers know that. There's a huge disconnect between packaging designers and the end of life managers that handle that material. And so through a system of EPR, by bringing all of those players together to the table, I really believe will help bring in a system of better designed materials that will ultimately improve our markets.
That was awesome, Amy. And because when I was hearing you talk about how far you've come and how you've got this policy. It sounds like it was a long process to get there. So I would say everybody on this call know that it's timing is everything when it comes to policy.
Yes.
And without money, you can't do the work. Or if
Yes.
you're a state recycling organization, or if you don't have people that are paid for by money to be doing the work, then you're not going to get
Yes.
anywhere. So first, timing is everything. Getting ready, being ready, and getting money first. So what Michigan did, which we didn't plan it this way, it's just the way it goes, we were able to successfully capture enough money that we can make stuff happen, and then build the momentum and tell the stories and get local officials to care about this. And now, as I've mentioned before, something has happened in Michigan that there's a darn good chance that all of you on this call are going to be engaged in Michigan in some way, because timing is everything. And now Michigan is going to be one of the states that is in that list of about 10 that are actively moving on statewide policy that's going to make a difference. But not everybody on this call has that opportunity. So think about what you can do right now, getting ready, thinking about how you can get some funding to keep some momentum going, so that when timing does happen, you're ready to move.
That's absolutely right.
I want to interrupt. We are running low on time. We have just about 4 minutes left, and in that time, I'm going to take a 1 minute kind of recap from all of our panelists. And while I'm doing that, because I'm a multitasker, you're seeing the poll up on your screen for our last polling question, which is, in one word, what do you hope for the future of recycling markets, hopefully after this session, or just in general? And so we're seeing those go up. We'll start, we'll go with Marianne first. Just 1 minute takeaway.
And repeat your question, Marissa. I got lost in the poll.
Sorry, that's why I didn't want to distract everyone with it. It's about a minute of anything that you want to leave the attendees with.
Yeah, I would say working together is the best policy. Working in a vacuum, one entity working by itself is great, but it exhausts people very quickly and you may not get as far as where you'd like to be. So I think involving all the different players in the work that you do around recycling market development makes it most beneficial and impactful.
Awesome. Amy.
I would echo that. We would not have the RMA if it were not for consensus building and reaching consensus. That was absolutely the bottom line for us of how we got to the policy that we have that was moved forward. Absolutely, you need every player or industry in the value chain represented at the table to make sure that you are moving forward with something that everyone can live with, and you can't do that in a vacuum.
Nope. And Matt.
The last thing I want to leave you with is, don't underestimate the power of local stories. So change happens because people want that change to happen and they care about it. So it's really about those localized stories to get the momentum going, so people know the good work that's already being done. Many of you might be thinking, oh my gosh, markets, they're so bad right now, or I'm never going to get policy. Thinking about the successes that you already have made and the good work that's already being done on the ground in your states, and telling that story is going to gain momentum so that you can get to that big policy or that big funding.
Excellent. We see a lot of people have contributed to our little word cloud here. I'm going to leave that up for just a second, and I'm going to switch and thank all of our panelists so much for your time, for your expertise, your contributions to this session. We're hearing nothing but kudos in the chat. And I want to leave you all with this. NRC has a markets development committee that is working to, that wants to have the resources to be able to do these market sessions again throughout the country. And so if you have a resource, if you have time, if you want to raise your hand to be part of this, or maybe you already have one going on in 2023, please reach out to nrcrecycles.org is right there. Happy to answer questions, happy to have you more involved, because as we learned on this fantastic session is that it takes a village, it takes all sorts of players from multiple fields. So I want to thank NRC for the opportunity, thank the panelists, and thank you all for your time.
Thanks,
Thank
Marissa.
you.
Thank you.